Good evening and welcome to our Wednesday evening Bible study at Tifton Missionary Baptist Church. We are again thankful and delighted that you have joined in with us tonight, and we have still ran into some issues getting the missionary that I've been working with trying to get things done and set up for him to have a video to share and be able to share with you all. But anyway, so you're stuck with me again tonight, and so it's a good thing I told you last week where we were going to be studying. If you paid any attention to that, I said we were going to be in Joshua chapter number 11. Joshua chapter number 11, and as you're finding your place there, just to kind of recap, last week we talked about the defeat that happened at Ai, and why that defeat came about as a result of the sin of Achan, because Achan took something he was specifically instructed not to, and we looked at that situation and talked about how it cost 36 men their lives. His decision that he made impacted more than just him. And so we need to understand that our decisions do much of the same. It impacts more than just us. And so tonight we're actually going to be looking at the overall victory that we're going to see here in Canaan. And as the children of Israel, as they began to inhabit and take the land that God had promised them. And so, a lot of times we read accounts in the Bible without realizing that we may not always have every detail of every single incident. And so it is with the campaign that won Israel, the victory over the tribes of Canaan. We don't have all of the details about that, and we have a list of kings that were conquered and battles that were fought, but we don't have the detailed description of every single fight. We have the details of the loss that took place at Ai. We have those, but we don't have them of every single battle that took place. And however, what we do have is enough detail to be sure that Israel was victorious over all their enemies. We know that. We have the information there that verifies that. And again, I want to remind you that at this time, the land of Canaan they had no central government. There was not just one king. So as the children of Israel made their way into Canaan, as they crossed over the Jordan and they made their way into Canaan, it was not like that. A lot of times today, when you go into to a war, there is one central government, and you have to go in, and there's one enemy, and you go in that way. But with Israel going in and conquering Canaan, there was not one central government. There was not just one king that had to be defeated. There was not just one army that had to be conquered. And so, in fact, Joshua conquered 31 kings in gaining control of the promised land. 31 kings. Yeah, that's a lot of work to go in and do that. And, I want to remind you that while Israel was a very capable army, while they were certainly great soldiers, that is not why they were victorious. That's not the reason they were victorious. They were victorious because God was fighting for His people. We're going to see that, and as you know, there were many times where they were far outnumbered by others. There are many times where the odds were certainly stacked against them, and they may have even been fighting an army that was not just superior in numbers, but may have even been superior in tactics and skill. Again, they won this, and they were able to do this because God was fighting for His people. And we need to understand that when God is on our side, eventual victory is assured. And so we also need to note that there were, it's interesting, at this particular time, there were only, if I'm not mistaken, there were only 2 old men of that older generation, if you will, that were in Israel at this time. That were a part of that Israelite group, and those were Joshua and Caleb. And although all the others had actually died in the wilderness, and we know from Joshua chapter 14 that Caleb was 85 years old when the land was divided, and we probably could assume that Joshua was somewhere around the same age as at least as old as Caleb. And so Joshua, when he died, was 110 years old. And I like this, and it's interesting. You look at this, you start talking about the age that they were, and again, just a reminder that it's absolutely never too late to do a great work for the Lord. It doesn't matter, we may think time and opportunity may have passed us by, and but understand that when you're following the direction of God, we can always win a great victory. And so we're going to look here at this situation as it plays out tonight, as we begin in Joshua chapter 11, beginning in verse number 1, says, "And it came to pass, when Jabin, king of Hatzor, had heard those things, that he sent to Jobab," that's not Jobab, that's Jobab, "king of Madon, and to the king of Shimron, and to the king of Akshaph, and to the kings that were on the north of the mountains and of the plains south of Chinneroth, and in the valley, and in the borders of Dor on the west, and the Canaanite on the east, and on the west, and to the Amorite, and the Hittite, and the Perizzite, and the Jebusite in the mountains, and to the Hivite under Hermon, in the land of Mizpah. And they went out, they and all their host with them, much people, even as the sand that is upon the seashore, in multitude, with horses and chariots, very many. And when all these kings were met together, they came and pitched together at the waters of Merom to fight against Israel." And so what we've just seen here is an alliance being formed. And, by the time that Joshua had conquered the kings of the central part of Canaan, and subdued the kings of the south, and destroyed most of the cities there, it was kind of like it was whenever they began to prepare for taking Jericho. You remember when the spies went into Jericho that they were told that their reputation pretty much went before them. The people of Jericho knew. They had heard about the things that their God had done for them, and they were afraid. And so what we find here is that same situation. That you remember, they went in, they divided the land, they conquered the central part of Canaan, divided the land north and south, and then they took the south. They would fight there, and the south had actually formed an alliance as well. And so you could say that they had probably heard about what Israel had done in that central portion of Canaan. And so the south formed an alliance of 5 kings. And God, with the help of God, they were able to easily defeat those 5 kings. And so now the north is they've heard about this. They've caught word that, man, they went in, the South formed an alliance, and we're going to have to do something bigger than that. We're going to have to establish something greater than what the South had in order for us to be able to defeat them and to get them out of here and to hold our ground. And so the North is going to form that great alliance. And that's what we've read here in these first 5 verses, is the alliance that is being formed here in the northern part of Canaan. And it's interesting to note that, a lot of times when plans fail, The South had a plan. They failed. And so here we find the North, they know that plan failed. And so they're going to raise a larger army. They're going to, we think that the problem is often when we fail is that we didn't try hard enough. I'm sure that the North is thinking, look, they didn't have a big enough army. They didn't have a bad enough army. They didn't have a strong enough army. They just didn't try hard enough. And so that we often do that same thing. When something fails, we sit back and think, we go back and do the same thing. But we got to try harder. We got to make it bigger and understand that, and we're going to see that the North would fail as well. And in fact, and I'll make mention of this group in just a little bit, but there was only one group of people that survived the conquest of Canaan. And they did so by making peace with the Israelites instead of fighting them. And so understand this, that a bad idea is still a bad idea no matter how many people agree with it or vote for it. A bad idea is still a bad idea. God had given this land to the Israelites, and that was that. There was nobody going to stop that. God had given it to them, and so those who live there understand this: they did not have to die there. I think people oftentimes, when they read these and they hear about this conquest of the children of Israel coming in and conquering all these cities and taking over, and they talk about they come in and took something that wasn't theirs, and it was theirs because God had given it to them. But the people that were there did not have to die there. They had two choices: to make peace with Israel or leave. Now, I mean, that's pretty simple and pretty well cut and dry. But that was their choices. They could make peace with Israel, or they could leave. And they had a choice, and unfortunately, all but one group there decided to stay and fight. And understand that when anybody is fighting against the will of God, when you are fighting against the will of God, you will eventually lose. You don't stand a chance. When you're fighting against the will of God, as the men of Jericho had observed, God was fighting for the children of Israel. And so this northern army, this alliance that they had formed, it was very impressive. Very impressive. They gathered an army so large that it could not be readily numbered. The fighting men, as the Bible says, they looked like the sand on the seashore in number. And in addition to this, they had horses and they had chariots. And in this day, today that might not scare us, somebody coming with a horse and a chariot. However, in this day that we're talking about, that was a fearsome weapon. One soldier in a chariot could literally, they could cut an entire legion to pieces just riding back and forth through the foot soldiers. And a mounted soldier is also far superior to a foot soldier. And so in every way that our world measures ability, if we were to sit down and look at what the Northern Alliance had versus what the children of Israel had, we would say that, man, the Northern Alliance, the children of Israel wouldn't stand a chance. And the Northern Alliance is far superior to them. And so, again, there's one important ingredient that Northern Alliance lacked. And that was they didn't have God on their side. It's the same exact, we see it time and time again. And we've even seen it in more modern history, talking about Israel versus those around them and the attacks that they receive and the treatment that they receive and how they've come out victorious so many times, yet they were the underdog. It's because God was fighting for them. Again, you go all the way back and we see it in David and Goliath. Man, Goliath far superior in every way. But he lacked one thing. He lacked God on his side. David had that one thing that Goliath lacked, and because he had that most important thing, he would end up victorious. Children of Israel here had God fighting for them. You and I need to remember that if you're a child of God, you have Him fighting on your side. Look at verse number 6. And the Lord said unto Joshua, Be not afraid because of them. For tomorrow about this time will I deliver them up, all slain before Israel. Thou shalt hew their horses and burn their chariots with fire. So Joshua came and all the people of war with him against them by the waters of Merom suddenly, and they fell upon them. And the Lord delivered them into the hands of Israel, who smote them and chased them unto great Zidon and unto Mizrapoth Maim and unto the valley of Mizpah eastward, and they smote them until they left them none remaining. Now, again, thinking about Joshua, Joshua is no stranger to difficult situations. Joshua has been in difficult situations. He had encountered overwhelming odds prior to this. This would not be the first time that he had done this, and so here he is facing yet another challenge. And if we go into a battle and we're outnumbered, we have a right. We might have a reason to be fearful. It doesn't matter if you're outnumbered. It doesn't matter if you have an army of 5 and they have an army of 500, or if you have an army of 5 and they have an army of 50 or 10. If anytime you're outnumbered, you might have a reason to be a little bit worried, to be a little bit concerned about how this might turn out. But I love the fact here that in verse number 6 it says, "And the Lord said unto Joshua, Be not afraid." Be not afraid. Wow. God wants him to not be scared. But here's what's great about this. Joshua, and this is how we as people, we see one thing. But God sees something totally different. We as people, we know, we can only think with our little finite minds. God is infinite. He knows all things. He understands all things. He's gonna, God told Joshua, "Be not afraid." He knew all about the enemy's army, and yet look what he says. He doesn't just tell him, "Be not afraid," but he even says, "This is why I want you to not be afraid." He says, "I don't want you to be afraid because of them. I don't want you to worry about that army. For tomorrow, about this time, will I deliver them up all slain before Israel." So he says, I don't want you to be afraid. I don't want you to look at them and see how big they are. Don't let them intimidate you. Don't let them, cause you to worry and fear. He says, because look, tomorrow you're going to have victory. You're going to have a victory in this. And so, he promises them that victory. And so, we have to understand that God sees tomorrow just as plainly and just as clearly as, well, most of us anyway, can see what happened yesterday. Maybe not everybody can see all of what happened yesterday real clear. But God can see it that way. Maybe just what happened a few minutes ago for some of you, that'll make it a little bit easier for you to grasp. But, we see it clearly, and we know that yesterday's events are true. The things that happened yesterday, they're true. I know that because they've already happened. But you see, it's the same way with God for tomorrow. He sees what's going to happen tomorrow. He knows what's going to happen tomorrow. And because of that, he has that assurance and he knows. And so, again, it takes faith for us to have that same kind of vision. But if we'll trust God, then we can have that same kind of vision. But it starts with us trusting Him. Joshua had to trust God. Joshua's no different than you or I. We might sit here and look at this and think, man, well, this is Joshua. This is not me. Joshua's human just like you and I are. And so for God to come to him and say, hey, don't worry about that. Tomorrow you're going to have victory over them. Are you sure? That's how I would respond. I'd be like, have you seen them? Have you looked at them and us? They're a little bit, they got more than we've got, God. But it takes faith. It took faith on Joshua's part. And I'm just going to tell you, I believe because Joshua up to this point, even times before, Joshua had faith the first time they went into Canaan and brought back a report to Moses. And Caleb and Joshua said, yeah, let's go. Joshua had faith that God would take care of him then. And that wasn't going to be. But even, all the way through and up until the point that they went into, they actually went in and conquered Jericho, just time and time again. And so the more that Joshua exercised faith up to this point, I believe with all my heart that was critical in Joshua being able to take this and get to this point and say, okay, God, I trust you. Now, you haven't let me down yet. So yeah, I'm going to put my faith in you. You see, the problem is we don't exercise that kind of faith all the time. We should, but we don't. And so whenever God's trying to reassure us that, hey, I've got you, I've got this, it's okay, we have a hard time saying, okay, I trust you. I'll follow you. I'll go with you. And so, it takes faith for us to have that kind of vision, but we can. Again, God knew everything about this army. He knew about the great horses and chariots, and he went down the list with Joshua to tell him what would happen. You look at this, he says that, I'll deliver them up all slain before Israel. He says, thou shalt hew their horses and burn their chariots with fire. And so he's even letting Joshua know, I do know that they have horses and chariots. I know they have all that. It's not catching me by surprise. It's not, and so we have to understand that same mentality. That there's not things going to come up in our lives, and when we get ready to go in and fight a spiritual battle, when we're fighting and trying to get through things in our lives, there's not things going to pop up that are going to catch God by surprise. We've talked about it. This whole virus that we're dealing with right now across the world didn't catch God by surprise. He knew it was coming, and so He reassures Joshua here in this case that, you know what? I know they have horses and chariots. You're going to kill their horses, and you're going to burn their chariots. That's how we're going to take care of that. We're going to deal with that. And so, and in fact, the hewed means that they would be hamstrung. And the chariots would be burned with fire. And so, none of those things that were so fearful, the things that might have instilled the most fear in the Israelites, none of that would be of any consequence to the people of Israel in another 24 hours. Those things, they're not even, don't worry about those things. Again, we have to remember that no matter how great our enemy, God is still greater. No matter how great the enemy is. 1 John chapter 4, verse 4, you are of God, little children, and have overcome them, because greater is He that is in you than he that is in the world. Joshua also used his ability to reason, and he had we've talked before about Joshua being a great strategic, military-minded leader, and he had done this before in the masterful flank attack of the Second Battle of Ai, whenever they would go in and actually conquer Ai the second time. And so he also, he's shown his cunningness, and when they went in and marched against the army of the south, the alliance of the south of Canaan, and now he's going to employ another innovative military tactic, and he's going to surprise this great army of the north, most likely expected to march south and search for the people of Israel and destroy them. So you can imagine that this army of the north, they've gathered together. They're prepared. They've got their alliance built. Their army is gathered. So many of them, they can't readily number them. You just don't know how many they are. They're like the sands on the seashore. And so you imagine they're expecting they're going to just march south and they're just going to find the Israelites and destroy them. And however, it didn't work that way. And I'm sure that they were not expecting an army, of their size to be attacked, from a weaker force. And yet that is just what Joshua did. He would suddenly attack this great army, and as God had promised, they fell before him. You see there, it says in verse 7, so Joshua came unto all the people of war with him against them by the waters of Merom suddenly, and they fell upon them. And so they attacked them quickly. They unexpectedly they came in and they attacked them. And then verse 8, we see the promise that God had made came true. It says, and the Lord delivered them into the hands of Israel, who smote them. And so, again, all the way down to the end of verse number 8, it says, and left them none remaining. And so Joshua, this is he caught them there at the waters of Merom, or Merom. This was a small lake that is north of the Sea of Galilee, near the city of Hatzor. And the army of the north, they actually fled in disarray, and they were not expecting it. They did not pursue the Israelites. Instead, they were chased by the army of Israel all over the northern part of the land until God said that, just as God said, that there's none that remained. And again, Joshua would take and he would burn the chariots and hamstrung the war horses, and then burned the city of Hatzor, which, with the defeated army, northern army, they've had the central campaign. They've defeated the Southern Alliance, and now they've defeated the Northern Alliance. Really, at this point, there is no other, no other resistance on this scale that would be left. There were no significant forces left in the land that would resist the army of Israel, and so there was understanding that there's much more fighting that would be done. Okay, that does not mean that the fighting was over. There was much more fighting to be done, and the victory was not yet quite complete. But again, no other resistance of this scale would take place. And again, I want to emphasize that this was not a battle that was won because of superior military might or tactics. Again, the army of the north was not weak. They were not weak by any sense of the imagination. The deciding factor in this whole thing is that God was fighting for His people, and they had His power on their side. God helped them by providing encouragement to them before the battle, and He also helped them by providing discouragement in the hearts of the enemies. You can imagine that as they were attacked, they thought, oh my goodness, what have we gotten ourselves into? And they fled. Because it's not what they were expecting. I don't know about you, but sometimes surprises, if they catch you off guard, I'm not necessarily one that likes surprises all the time. Sometimes I do. Some surprises are good. But that would not be a surprise that I would want. Whenever I'm not expecting, coming in confident, coming in, feeling like that we're fixing to handle business, and all of a sudden they attack, and so that northern army, they fled, and so, I believe that God provided some discouragement in their hearts, and He was on the battlefield to assure the individual Israelite soldiers won a victory. And if you accept this biblical account, and you very well should, there is not a single Israelite casualty in this battle. Also, not a single survivor among the enemies. We talk about how great a victory that Jericho was. And it was in its own right and in its own sense, because it was fought in absolutely non-traditional way, if there is a traditional way to fight. But here we don't find a single casualty. We don't find any of the Israelite soldiers as a casualty, and not a single survivor among the enemy. I don't know if there can be a greater or more complete victory than that. And it might seem incredible to us, but again, it's because God is able. It wasn't because Israel was able, it's because God is able. We need to remember, our victories are not going to be because we were able. Look at what I done. That's the problem with too many of us, and that's why we fail more than we succeed. But God is able. God is able. Look at Joshua chapter 11. Jump down to verse number 18. Joshua made war a long time with all those kings. And then look down at verse 23. And so Joshua took the whole land according to all that the Lord had said unto Moses, and Joshua gave it for an inheritance unto Israel according to their divisions by their tribes. And the land rested from war. Again, we read the highlights. We've read the highlights of the campaign of Joshua, but there was a long war that was fought to gain control of Canaan. And even after Joshua died, there would still be more of the land to be conquered. And we find, if you were to go over and read Joshua 13, 1 through 6, but Joshua, he did bring this land. Remember, whenever they came in, it was not under one political group. It was not under one king, one governing body, anything like that. There was many kings and there was many cities, and they were just divided. And so Joshua did bring them under political control of the Israelites, and the land was sufficiently in their control so that it could be divided, and each family could go out and possess the land as God promised. So all that God had promised, the promise, made back to Moses, and then through him, even to the generation that Moses, even though that generation that Moses led, they perished in the desert, God always honors His word no matter what men do or do not do. Again, a new generation became heir to the promise that God had made to the one before them, and it's remarkable to me, going back to the victory, that we only find of one battle that was lost. And that was the battle we looked at last week, that first battle at Ai. 36 men in that battle would perish. And as far as we know, I could be mistaken in this, but as far as I can find, and if somebody knows better, please correct me, but as far as I can find, those would be the only casualties, the only Hebrew casualties. We read that there was only one group that made peace with Joshua. And that group was the Gibeonites. And they made a treaty with Joshua through deception and they would actually become the servants of the Israelites because of it. And you can go back and read about that in Joshua chapter 9, in verses 1 through 27. But all the rest of the enemies of Israel were destroyed, and God's people would emerge victorious. Again, kind of touching on the same idea of something I mentioned a while ago about them coming in and taking a land that was not theirs. It was theirs. God gave it to them. But understand that they were not coming into this land to replace an existing peaceful government. That is not what was going on in the land of Canaan. It was anything but that. The land of Canaan was actually, it was a very wild place. The original spies had observed that, they'll devour their own inhabitants. They're killing each other in there, in the land of Canaan. They're fighting amongst themselves. And so the original spies even said that. And so the people of the land of Canaan, they were fierce and they were cruel and they fought each other. And it was just in a continuous, constant state of turmoil. I mean, it was bad. And so, and you say, well, how do you know that? Well, biblically we know that based on even just looking at the report of the original spies that went in. But just look at Jericho. If it was under a peaceful government and group and things were all just, I don't even know what phrase to use there. You can fill in the blank. Jericho wouldn't have had a wall around its city. There was a wall around Jericho for, a reason. And it was, wasn't only to keep the people of Israel out. That wall was there before they realized that people of Israel were coming. They had been fighting, they were fighting with people for generations before Joshua ever came. And so God is not just being cruel to those that dwelt in Canaan. He wasn't just being cruel to them. Instead, He was visiting justice on them for the centuries of misdeeds and was using this situation to accomplish more than one purpose. Because don't forget, God is not only the God of Israel, but God is the God of every other nation on this planet. He worked through Israel, but understand this, that He has a purpose for all men everywhere. And those nations were not treated unfairly. They had many chances to repent and turn to God, and God would not have received them He would have received them if they had done that. But they had rejected their day of grace, and now God had brought judgment on them through the nation of Israel. I want to encourage you, don't ever question the working of God. We may not have all the pieces of the puzzle. We may not have all the answers and all the details, but He does. And that's what matters. He has the details. He understands all things that are happening and going on behind the scenes when we don't. He sees it all. We should accept His judgment as correct and glory in them. Again, we may not understand them, but His judgment is always right. Always right. He's never wrong. He is a righteous judge. And so His judgment on those people was not wrong. They had a chance, and they chose not to take it. And so at this point, we see there at the end of verse number 23 says, "And the land rested from war." I tell you, I get sick of the news. I get sick of the fighting that goes on around the world, not just in our country, but especially in our country. And I tell you, I long for a day when we don't have to worry about that anymore. May not see it this side of eternity, but as a child of God, I know that one day I'm going to be in a land that's not going to have all that. This land here, for many years, there had been trouble. People of that land fought each other, and they fought Joshua and the people of Israel, and now the land was at peace and God's will could be done. Understand that did not happen because of the plan of some man. Somebody didn't stand up and say, we want peace, let's get a rally together and go out. No, it was God's plan. That's why that happened. It didn't come because of the movement of armies or the decisions of king. Again, it came about because of God. They were victorious because they trusted in the Lord. Let me tell you something. Again, as a child of God, I may not see victory here, but if I'll stay faithful to Him one day I'm going to get to see the victories. He's fighting for me. In fact, the greatest battle that had to be fought, it's already been fought and won. And that was the battle over death, hell, and the grave. And I'm so thankful that my Savior came out victoriously. How can we go through this life and, as He told Joshua, be not afraid. Don't let that bother you. When it seems like things are just, man, this world seems like it's just messed up more and more every day. How can we be not afraid? Because we don't know what tomorrow holds, but we know the one who holds tomorrow. We know that this world is not our home. We're just passing through. I don't know about you, but I want to be victorious. You know, we can be victorious if we just have faith and trust in the Lord to get us through things. Would you bow with me? Father in heaven, we thank You so much for this day. Lord, we thank You for all that You've done, and Lord, we thank You for this example. Lord, of not showing Joshua and the nation of Israel's superiority, but Yours. Lord, of not only showing Your faithfulness to them, but Lord, Your promises that You gave to them, that You upheld. Lord, and how You fight for Your people. And I'm thankful that You go into battle with me and fight with me. Sometimes I try to go in by myself and come out defeated. But Lord, help us to remember that if we go with You to fight with us and for us, Lord, greater is He that is in me than he's in the world. Lord, we can come out victorious just like the children of Israel did here. No matter how outnumbered, underpowered we may appear in that battle, if we have You, we can come out victorious. Lord, I pray, God, that You would just continue to be with us during this time. Lord, be with the many who are sick. God, comfort those who've lost loved ones. Be with those that are working continuously, Lord, at their jobs, wherever it is that they are, whatever it is they're doing. God, You know each and every one of them. I pray, God, that You would comfort them, strengthen them, encourage them, and be with their families, Lord, as they're away. God, again, we just thank You so much for Your love, Your grace, and Your mercy. Lord, we ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. Once again, I want to thank you for joining us, and again, I hope that you have a good rest of your week, and just continue to be praying. Still some things that are holding me back from us making some moves and possibly opening, but be praying for those decisions, for wisdom, guidance, direction. And if you have prayer requests or other needs, be sure to let me know, and I'll be glad to help you however I can. But I want you to know, each and every one of you, that I love you and that I'm praying for you, and look forward to being together again soon. Thank you.